Old masters were just beyond insanity. Literally every aspect of their paintings were calibrated to perfection. The thing is though, with these monsters, is that they started off as absolute beginners. That is, before going through a specific art routine that provenly and consistently turned noobs into masters. And so in this video, we'll explore their structured art plan, how they built up their artistic creativity, and how they sped up their overall progress, as well as how you and I can low-key just copy a bunch of this to genuinely improve our art. So in the 19th century, French Academy of Arts is generally regarded as some of the best art education ever, which is why we're going to be looking into them today. So for new beginner art students, before even picking up a paintbrush, students had to first attain absolute mastery at drawing. And to achieve this, their masters had a proven and rigorous 3-phase drawing progression system. Now in phase 1, new students would be given master drawings of various body parts to use as their reference, and they were tasked with drawing these over and over again until they got comfortable with it. After all, as they say, master the figure and you've mastered all of drawing. And their path to mastery over the figure start off by repetitively drawing all the different facial features like the eyes, the mouth, the nose, and then doing the whole head, and then moving down to the arms, the torso, and then the legs, and then doing the whole thing all together. And as a sort of kind of trick to help their students improve the accuracy of their drawings a lot quicker, their masters would recommend to them to establish either in imagination or reality a horizontal and vertical line in front of the objects that they're producing. Because using these kind of X and Y axes on the reference and comparing the lines and shapes and their angles and their relationships to each other helped guide their drawings to be just significantly more accurate. Then comes phase 2 of their path to mastering all of drawing. So here they're hyper-focused on heightening their students' understanding of light and shadow. And so instead of referencing line drawings like before, they now be referencing plaster casts, right? These kind of mini sculptures of the head and of different body parts. And the reason this was better than jumping straight to studying from life was because these casts had really smooth surfaces. There was no distracting skin wrinkles or skin pores or anything like that. And it was really easy to see how the light affected the forms. Now, to help their students get better at seeing values, their masters recommend to them to either squint their eyes to blur their vision. Apparently only 50% of people can blur their vision, so if you can't do that, then sucks to suck, right? But if you do something like that, it makes it a lot easier to make out the different light and shadow masses a lot more accurately, which helped in training their artistic eye, learning how to separate light and shadow, as well as eventually learning how to link them with, midtones and everything. And thus came the third and final and most difficult drawing phase, which was studying live models. Now this is obviously a lot harder since they're just naturally more detail, more variations in tones and everything. And so making these artistic decisions, learning what details to leave out and which ones to leave in, was one of the main challenges that students faced here. And so to get a little bit better at this, their masters recommend to them to instead of starting off by trying to make fully finished figure drawings, they'd recommend to instead just focus on getting the basic gesture of the model down, getting some basic proportions in, getting some basic light and shadow messes in, and kind of just focusing on getting that right before slowly moving up towards making a fully finished drawing. And so they did this, and when the master eventually decided that the students were comfortable enough with this phase, they finally were allowed to graduate to painting. Now we will go into a bit more detail on how long they spent at each phase, that's all kind of crazy, but for now they were allowed to start practicing painting. And the way they did things made things really easy because when they were already going into this, they had a good grasp on their foundations on values and precision and observation skills and all that jazz. And so literally at this point, the only thing they would be doing in order to get a grip on color and composition and brushwork and everything else that comes with painting, the main thing they'd be doing was the esquisse paint, which literally just translates to the painted sketch, right? They'd be going to the museum, the Louvre or something, and doing these loose studies, these painted sketches of the masterworks there to get a grip on the foundations of painting. There's pretty much no instruction from the master at this point other than just occasional feedback. And by just doing those over and over and over and over and over again, they became really comfortable with the paintbrush. Now this strict adherence to formal academic standards was obviously extremely rigid, but interestingly enough, throughout this entire routine, there was a massive emphasis on cultivating individual creativity. Now, one of the greatest masters of the day once said, "If you're not skillful enough to sketch a man falling out of a window during the time it takes him to get from the 5th story to the ground, you will never be able to produce monumental work." So there's this massive emphasis on literally just sketching, learning how to get your kind of original interpretation of a subject down on a paper without being tainted by the artistic expectations of the day. They even have like, sketch competitions, whether it was drawn sketches or painted ones. People wrote books on literally just how to sketch. Students were encouraged to carry like a daily sketchbook around with them where they just go out and about, and whenever they saw something interesting, they just kind of sketch it in their like daily sketchbook. And the reason for all this is because this is where students could actually express their own ideas and their own individuality without being shackled by the academic standards of the day. And so there were plenty of students who sucked or who weren't that good at the regular exercises, but when it came to just sketching and expressing themselves, they were one of the best. And so incorporating this emphasis on like free flowing and fluidity with their sketches, along with their already highly structured and highly rigid military like art regimen, resulted in a balance that I think is really key in the kind of art that these guys ended up putting forward. But perhaps it would have meant absolutely nothing if these guys didn't nail the thing that I like to call the growth sweet spot. Now, considering how difficult this regimen was, there's obviously students who were messing up all over the place. And so sometimes their master would come in and draw over their work to show them how it needs to be done. And they kind of had to keep going till they got the thing right. And when they did get it right, they got a nice little pat on the back and got handed even more difficult assignments to keep the difficulty up with their progress. Now, this perfectly encapsulates the difficulty sweet spot. This is where the thing that you're practicing is neither too easy nor too hard, but just right in the middle, just at or slightly beyond wherever your current drawing level is at right now, because this forces your skill to expand and meet that demand. And the thing is, they kind of have to keep increasing that difficulty level up to keep up with your growth. So for these old masters, especially considering what we know now about how learning and skill growth works on a neurological level, the way they'd consistently challenge their students like this was like really good. Now remember, the point of this entire thing is to look at what these guys did so we can low-key just copy a bunch of it. But the thing is, when it comes to like their structured routines, for example, you obviously don't have to copy every single element one for one. I mean, I guess you can if you want to, but the thing is, like, these guys, they could spend like 2, 3, even 4 years on literally just one phase of drawing, and the entire process from start to finish could take even up to 10 years for some of these students, which they could afford to do because art was going to be their full-time thing. And back then, artists weren't like broke, which is why the way I see it, it makes so much more sense to look into like the underlying principles of what they did and like emulate that, since that's a lot easier. Which is why out of everything we've talked about so far, we're gonna derive 4 specific principles, like principles which we can actually like copy. The first one being how they approached formulating their art structure. So if you watched a couple of my slightly older videos, you know that I'm a stickler for like routine and like structure and everything. But when I look at how these guys did their thing, what I love most is like the clear path of progression that they had within their overall like art plan. Because these guys knew their goal was to become an elite level painter. And they knew the clear individual steps it would take to get there. Even within those individual steps, there's all these kind of like mini steps. Like for example, in their phase 1 of drawing, where they'd be referencing master drawings, they would start off with doing just line drawings before proceeding on to like doing shaded drawings. And even in like phase 3, where they were doing like the live models, they'd start off by just trying to first get the gesture down, get the basic proportions down, before trying to graduate to doing more like fully finished drawings. So there's that clear like progression path even within like each of their individual steps to their main goal. But you also don't want to get like too caught up in like the rigid structure and everything. Just like these guys did, you want to incorporate elements of fluidity. You want to be like just having fun every once in a while, just having fun with it every once in a while. Going outside, scary, I know, but going outside and like sketching just for fun, just sketching whatever you see around you. I mean, I guess you could do it indoors too. I mean, it's not that deep. But honing that spontaneity and having that element to things where you're just kind of being more loose and fun with it is a good balance, is a good kind of counterbalance with the more like structured side of things. You know what I mean? So the sketching thing specifically is something I'm trying to personally lock in on more frequently. And that ties in really nicely to the just as if not even more important element, which is the sweet spot, right? Like, which is genuinely pushing yourself. And the complicated thing with the sweet spot, the difficulty sweet spot, is that you kind of have to like update your brain, if that makes sense. For example, I think like about 2 years ago, I really wanted to get better at drawing the figure. Like I got scroll through Pinterest and see these like ballet looking poses on there, and I used to think to myself, bro, if I could draw that, I'm gonna be so like, it's gonna be so cool, bro. I'm gonna be so happy if I can draw that. In my head, that was like the pinnacle of like all of drawing, you know? And so, you know, I worked on it and I got better at it, but the mistake I made, which I only noticed not too long ago, was that I was trying to brush up a little bit on like my figure drawing and everything. And I kind of just realized like I'm drawing the exact same like kinds of references that I would still be doing like 2 years ago, even though I've become more comfortable with it. So what I do need to be doing is like making it harder to stay within that difficulty sweet spot, you know? And there's obviously a bunch of ways to do it, but the way I'm trying to do it is by referencing someone like Michelangelo, because he'd have all these like works where it'd just be a tangle of bodies just like interacting with each other in all these like super complex ways. And I'd look at this and I think like, oh, and like the reference is a little bit scary, like I'm not sure I can do it, which is exactly why I try and go for it. It like genuinely pushes me, it makes me sit back in my chair and think, okay, how am I actually going to make this thing work? The more I do stuff like this, at some point in the future, it's going to become a lot easier to me. And when that happens, I need to kind of like upgrade the difficulty even more so. Maybe take like the reference and try and draw it in like a different perspective or something like that. Or I can be like, okay, I'm satisfied with how good I am at this right now, and I can move on to trying to get better at something else. You know what I mean? So like upgrading your standards of what you consider to be difficult as you gradually improve your skill level is kind of cool. Now, the third kind of principle is kind of short, but it's also super important. You probably, I mean, unless you're in like art school or something like that, you probably don't have like an art master or anything crazy like that. As we said not too long ago, in this like French academic system, the masters would be coming to the students and sometimes drawing over their work to like show them how it needed to be done, to kind of like steer them in the right direction. And so a good equivalent of this that you can do is like maybe you draw something with your, maybe like you take a reference, you try and like draw it or whatever, and you just kind of stick the reference under your drawing and kind of like see where you deviated. And obviously you don't need to like be able to make a fully accurate one-for-one copy, but as long as you're kind of like in the ballpark where like the structure is pretty much there, like the proportions are pretty much there and all that stuff, you know, that's a good place to be, I think. And like obviously if you draw like traditionally, then like, damn bro, sucks to be you, huh? I guess you can like print out the reference and like stick it under your paper or something. So I think something like that is actually really important, because if you're actually like pushing yourself with the sweet spot stuff, you're probably going to be making a bunch of mistakes, and it can help you like notice maybe certain mistakes that you tend to be making too often. Like maybe you draw eyes way too big or something, which is something I used to really do. I guess there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but if you're trying to actually like recreate a reference, then like, you know, yeah. And so when you look at the fourth and final principle, the man himself, the GOAT, Leonardo da Vinci, once said, the artist ought to first exercise his hand by copying drawings from the hand of a good master. So for the system we've been looking at this entire video, throughout the process from like when they just got started up all the way till when they were advanced, one of the main emphases was studying masterworks, whether it was master paintings or master drawings or whatever. Looking at what masters were doing and looking at a lot of those was a really big deal. And one of the main reasons they did this, kind of like expanding the scope of their imagination in a sense by exposing them to like a bunch of different art. Just because there's so much art out there and there's so much good art out there that being just exposed to it just feels so right, you know? Which is why like Inspiragio is one of my favorite YouTube channels, because he just like looks at a lot of like different paintings and goes into like the story of the artist and like the meaning of the paintings and stuff like that. And it's just so interesting to see how so many artists throughout the history have kind of used their arts to express their ideas in all these different like unique ways. So genuinely looking at a bunch of good artists and like studying a bunch of great artists is really, really, really based.